found out I was gonna be a father, I was so scared. Scared of what it would mean. I had to be there for you. No matter what.
Death Stranding is a complicated and divisive game. Upon release, it was criticized over its many faults and perceived flaws. Critics pinned it as an incredibly dull walking simulator. They said it was bizarrely paced, because it contained over 6 hours of cutscenes, it was radically weird, and it was convoluted and pretentious. Still though, for being the first game that Kojima and his team released from his newly formed Kojima Productions, time has been very kind to it, and the title has reached over 20 million players. For every player or critic that experienced and hated the game, another has found the game to be profoundly resonant in its story and its messages. Now, this is not a review of Death Stranding, nor is it a story explanation. It isn't even an examination of all the themes of the game. Many on the internet have covered the themes of the game over many forums, videos, and articles, but there's one conversation that can only be found in a fleeting few number of online spaces. My desire for this video is that it will serve as the single most comprehensive and compelling piece of content on the internet for building the case of this missing strand. The case for Death Stranding's pro-life messaging. Death Stranding is a story of connections. Connections between husbands and wives, connections between brothers and sisters, connections between the living and the dead, and connections between parents and children. Death Stranding is a messy examination of the loss of love and loved ones, the smothering and spiraling grief that results from such painful loss, and the price of moving on from it. Death Stranding is a story about the choice of morality in the most torturous of circumstances and the devastating consequences that choice may bring. Death Stranding is the account of a man whose wife and child have been violently taken from him. A man who has spiraled into that pit of grief, yet in spite of his pain, continually sacrifices himself for those who are still living, seeking to tread a moral path to bring light and connections to them in a world that tears at those connections. Finally, however, at the intersection of all of these themes, I believe Death Stranding is a proclamation of the importance of the preservation of life, specifically those who have yet to be born.
Child special. One of a kind.
The world of Death Stranding is a truly bizarre one. In order to understand the game's themes, it's very important to first understand the basics of the universe it takes place in. Beginning a new game drops you right into the middle of a post-apocalyptic America. The continent has been socially and politically atomized due to an event known as the Death Stranding. The Death Stranding was a cataclysmic phenomenon that caused the barriers between the living world and the world of the dead to be broken, allowing the souls, or Kas, of the deceased to drift back from their rest and wander the world among the Has of the still living. The term Ka and Ha are used frequently to refer to body and soul, words borrowed from Egyptian mythology. The entities that have come back are known as BTs, or beach things, so named because they are souls trapped on beaches. Every living thing has a beach, which is shaped by their personality, identity, and experiences. Beaches function as holding cells, in different purgatorial spaces where those who have died remain until they are ready to move on to their final resting place. After the Death Stranding, however, many Kas waiting on these beaches became stranded and were able to cross back into the living world unimpeded by the barriers meant to keep them contained, becoming what are referred to as BTs. They exist in the real world, invisible, tethered between states of life and death by strand-like umbilical cords. They are drawn to the world of the living due to the presence of chiralium, a crystal-like substance that's linked to the afterlife. Unfortunately, wandering BTs have a heavy cost. They seek to reconnect with things still living, chasing them down to seek balance and stability, an act which has dramatic and catastrophic consequences. For those unfortunate enough to be caught by a BT, the likelihood that they survive such an encounter is very low. Upon their death, a large BT known as a catcher attempts to consume the chiralium-rich body, causing BT antimatter and human matter to collide, which results in a staggeringly large explosion, referred to as a void-out. For the world of Death Stranding, a single dead body left uncremated can spell the horrific end of an entire Knot City, the safe havens where survivors hide from the horrors of the outside world. It's into this world that we are introduced to Sam Porter, so named because of his occupation as a porter. He is a talented delivery man and survivor suffering from aphantasmophobia, an extreme fear of human touch. He travels the continent delivering packages to survivors. As players, we understand that what he delivers is more than simply parcels, letters, and goods. He ties together a devastated nation one step at a time, bringing with him connection and hope to those stranded, presumably for the rest of their lives. Every stop and delivery is another human connected in a world ruled by isolation, fear, and hopelessness. It is his and many other porters' deliveries that allow secluded refugees to maintain hobbies, form and grow relationships, and pursue knowledge of things outside the steely confines of survivor bunkers. Sam's job, of course, is exceptionally dangerous and taxing. To wander the shattered post-Death Stranding world is not for the weak. Along with BTs, an acidic rain known as timefall frequently batters the earth, instantly aging and destroying nearly everything it touches, especially humans. Sam, however, is particularly well equipped for such an occasion. In addition to his fear of touch, he is a sufferer of a condition known as dooms. This condition gives him heightened sensitivity to chiralium, allowing him to perceive BTs and other stranded dead who roam freely. Sam has a relatively low level of doom sensitivity, which often manifests in tears and rashes when near BTs. Further, Sam is a repatriate, meaning he has the ability to die and return to the world of the living by passing through his beach and reconnecting with his dead body. Finally, with this knowledge, let's set in place the last pieces of the puzzle: bridges and BBs, or bridge babies. Early on, Sam receives, rather violently, a bridge baby. When we see this BB for the first time, it is immediately obvious what we are looking at. It is an infant child in a small glass pod. But its use and application for those surviving in the Death Stranding is extraordinarily valuable. Bridge babies are children who are induced births from a still mother, a woman who is unable to wake up from a brain-dead, unconscious, and vegetative state. The children found in the wombs of these still mothers are fully reliant on the mother's body and life given to them via their umbilical cord. However, the mother state renders the baby in a place of limbo. Similar to a BT, the child is suspended halfway between the worlds of the living and the dead, which allows them to sense BTs with great precision. Due to this, Bridge is an organization whose stated goal is to reconnect the continental United States via a chiral network, utilize these still mothers, and remove the babies from their wombs at 28 weeks, placing them into artificial wombs which connected to BB pod users via an artificial umbilical cord. When active, the BB is able to sense BTs, and the Odradek device mounted on the user's back will tell them where the spirits are roaming. BBs are intentionally kept in this space of limbo. They only function reliably when they have no affinity for one side or the other. They are manufactured items with an intended application. Once they break and are no longer useful, they're disposed of like any other tool. In the words of Deadman,
Sam, a BB's a tool, not a human being. Bridge, yes. Baby, no. This tool, this weapon, is transforming into a living being. It's gaining weight. Its brain activity is increasing. It's accumulating memories. BB-28 is becoming self-aware, becoming an actual child.
Doesn't sound like a problem to me.
what is a life? What is alive? From the first time you are introduced to BBs, you are told the same line. The BB is a piece of equipment. It's not a baby. Don't get attached to it. What Death Stranding does so well, however, is making it abundantly clear that the child trapped in that glass tank is a baby, and it is absolutely alive. To say otherwise is simply to deny your lying eyes, toss common sense to the wayside, and live in denial of everything Death Stranding says to the player. The game is rich in symbolism from the start. The BB is enclosed in an artificial womb meant to simulate the conditions of its mothers. The same womb that it was torn from to be commoditized for the manufacture of designated fieldware. The baby must be comfortable in order to function properly. It must be fooled into believing it is still safe. An odd thing to have to do for a non-living being. The pod is slung directly over Sam's stomach in the same location as the mother would hold the baby during pregnancy. The pod must even be connected to the user via an artificial umbilical cord. Umbilical cords hold heavy significance in Death Stranding. The life supplied by a mother to their children is represented in many ways throughout the world. Umbilical cords connect BTs to the living world. As a symbol, umbilical cords represent the life-giving strands that connect us and allow for humanity to continue, generation after generation. They represent our shared social, emotional, spiritual, and physical strands. They signify the ties that bind us, the tears, thrills, trials, and triumphs that tether us to an earthly human experience. It is only through this cord of connection, this raw symbol of humanity, that BB can function. The suggestion that this piece of equipment is more than a utilitarian item doesn't stop there, of course. The practice of incinerating corpses is extended to BB as well.
But why is it here?
Because it's flagged for disposal. Central Knot's gone, and our headquarters along with it. Because that thing didn't do its job. It's all in Igor's logs.
But it's still alive.
It can't be repaired, and it can't survive outside the pod. Pity it if you want, but the decision has been made. It has to go. The director approved the order.
Oddly enough, the piece of utility equipment will necrotize and be consumed by BTs in the same manner any human would. This necrotization does not happen with plants, nor does it happen with animals, only living beings with souls. Deadman also states in no uncertain terms that BB has a beach of her own. The child in the mechanical womb already has a beach connected to her living soul, influenced by her personality, identity, and experiences. Another character, Mama, speaks to Sam of her own memories in the womb. She tells him she remembers her mother's heartbeat, and the heartbeat of her conjoined twin sister, Lochna. The game doesn't speak exclusively by its own rules, however. Some references and statements feel lifted directly from modern political discourse and pasted into dialogue. If you haven't already seen the connection, "it's just a piece of equipment" seems a direct reference to the common phrase, "it's just a clump of cells," or "it's just a zygote," or perhaps worst of all, "it's just a parasite." It's blatantly dehumanizing language. It's the kind of language that Bridges has made standard in reference to BBs in order to justify their horrific procedures and the open murder and commoditization of these yet unborn children. It's the kind of language that is used in the real world to soften the idea of tearing apart the growing bodies of helpless children, murdering them in the womb of real women when they are no longer desired or convenient. Deadman, the biggest offender of this kind of language, also tells Sam that it's nearly impossible for the BB to live outside the womb.
It's hardware, Sam. Manufactured for a purpose. A purpose that cannot fulfill outside the pod. There is a 70% risk of catastrophic failure simply in removing it.
In other words, it's not viable outside of the womb, artificial or not. It can't be a human and it can't be living. In the manufacture of BB pods, the child is removed from its still mother's womb at 28 weeks old. This is the third trimester, but is still 12 weeks from full term. A child born in this state would have over a 90% chance of survival with proper medical attention. According to Deadman and other members of Bridges, this talking, living child may be used until it dies, then thrown away and burned without a second thought. Compared to our real America, however, this almost feels like a merciful option. At least the baby's body isn't mutilated and destroyed until after it has died. What's so shocking about the in-game representation of this kind of gross rationalization is the way in which the child is fully displayed instead of being hidden inside a mother's womb. The womb where shocking violence can take place away from the guilty eyes of a mother. A mother who has had the child who relied on her for life instead murdered and dismembered inside her own body. Death Stranding takes the phrase "out of sight, out of mind" and instead plants the baby firmly in sight. To deny Sam's BB being a living child is an insane and foolhardy proposition. All the more because the player can clearly see her. But that's just it. It was a baby before it was placed in the pod, and it remains a baby after. Not everyone in the world of Death Stranding has the otherworldly powers of denial that Deadman has, however. Sam immediately treats BB as a living being. He cares for her, rocks her when she's upset, talks to her, and eventually names her. He calls her Lou, after his own daughter who was taken in the void out that killed his wife. In his interactions with Deadman, the conflict is clear. Deadman simply wants to keep the piece of equipment working for Sam so he can continue to strand together America, city by city. Sam, though focused on his mission, is bothered by Deadman's flippant and dismissive language, until he eventually corrects Deadman.
It's just a tool. Life and death are supposed to be irrelevant. But we've got attached to each other all the same, haven't we?
Kid's not just a tool. Name's Lou.
Lou, huh? That's a good name.
The mother of Fragile, a fellow porter, speaks in no uncertain terms of what she calls the building of a new America on the bodies of murdered children. Nearby her message, in the director's cut of the game, a graveyard can be found that has been dedicated to the sacrificed infants. Dozens of gravestones scattered on a hillside, stark monuments of mourning and remembrance of an ongoing bloody slaughter that place the lives of those already born above the helpless lives of those who had yet to be. The emotional climax of the game is the devastating moment that Sam returns from his final mission on a beach to find that, after many scares, Lou has finally stopped moving in her pod. Deadman hands the darkened pod to Sam and tells him it must be incinerated to prevent necrosis and a void out. He also tells Sam that he could remove the dead child from the pod just to see what happens, but it would be a direct contravention of governmental orders pertaining to BB pods. Sam makes one last journey up the nearby mountain with the child he has grown to love, preparing himself to bid farewell for the last time. As he treks on, BB's theme plays. Upon reaching the incinerator, however, Sam instead burns the cuff devices used to connect him to the chiral network, becoming untraceable, and removes Lou from the pod. He desperately attempts to revive her. Sam, a stoic and emotionless man who rarely speaks, whispers desperately to Lou, cradling her in his hand while he cries hopelessly. Finally giving up, he rests her head on his shoulder and weeps. In every direction you look, it can only be confirmed that Death Stranding, in no uncertain terms, views bridge babies to be living, breathing humans with souls and potential, trapped and exploited for the benefit of others. Death Stranding does more than this, however. An examination of the other characters that Sam forms bonds with throughout his journey continue to cement the importance of the preservation of life, born and unborn, even if the consequences of doing so are death itself.
Everything's true. Except for all the lies.
Fragile is a woman who Sam meets at the beginning of the game. She's a fellow porter and doom sufferer who operates her own private courier company, Fragile Express. The company was passed down to her from her father after his death. As a more severe doom sufferer, she has the ability to instantly transport herself to and from beaches. At an early point in her career, she partners with a man named Higgs, the two of them merging their businesses under one umbrella. Though Higgs turns out to be the game's main antagonist, Fragile was unaware of his schemes when she partnered with him. In time, however, it's revealed to her that Higgs is the leader of a terrorist group, and the packages that Fragile and her couriers had been delivering into cities were not food and supplies, but rather bombs and guns which were intended to be used by other terrorist cells. Fragile herself had delivered a nuclear device directly into Middle Knot City, which detonated, killing everyone. Shortly after, she realizes that another bomb was being delivered to South Knot City. She hastily makes her way to the city and intercepts the bomb, only to be caught by Higgs and his men, who strip her to her underwear. Higgs gives her two choices. The first, she may use her dooms to teleport herself away from South Knot, saving herself but allowing the city to be destroyed. The second, run through the timefall and throw the bomb into a nearby tar pit, dampening the explosion and saving the city at the expense of her own body. She chooses the latter, and Higgs places a hood on her to preserve her face as a testament to the consequences of not following his orders. Fragile successfully disposes of the bomb and saves the city, but her body is permanently scarred with an elderly and frail body as the price. When she finally reveals this to Sam, she says she's regretted the decision even to the present day. In spite of her regret over the past, Sam clearly admires her decision. It was the right thing to do, regardless of personal outcomes. Even though it brought heavy consequences to Fragile, her choice was the correct one. As we see her character develop throughout the story, we also see her come to terms with this. Fragile's story demonstrates that morality is not dictated by convenience or a weighing of costs and benefits to us. Another woman that Sam meets early in the game is named Malingen, but is simply referred to as Mama. As mentioned, Mama was born as a conjoined twin with her sister Lochna. The two were separated from each other at birth but shared a consciousness. which was tied together by a common beach. This beach acted as a metaphysical space in which their cause could communicate with each other, even when they were physically apart. Both Mama and her sister were incredibly intelligent and put their smarts to use developing the chiral network for bridges, which they intended to use to connect America together once again after the Death Stranding. Mama was so enamored with her work and goals that she shunned children. She didn't feel like she had the need for them, eschewing kids or family to pursue her advancements in science with her sister. Lochna, however, didn't feel the same way. Falling in love with a fellow Bridges employee, she wanted to have a child. Sadly, the sister's birth complications meant that Mama's ovaries were unable to produce eggs and Lochna's uterus was unable to carry a child to term. Suddenly, though, Lochna's partner died in an accident, leaving her devastated. Sensing her sister's grief, Mama proposed that she could be a surrogate womb for Lochna's baby, using frozen sperm. They go ahead with the plan and Mama carries the child until her scheduled delivery. As she waited in the hospital for a C-section, it was attacked by terrorists, causing the building to collapse, killing nearly everyone inside and trapping Mama under debris. As she lay dying under the rubble, she gave birth to the child. But instead of bringing life into the world, she brought death. The child, which had died, was tethered to her, having become a harmless infant BT, supplying life to Mama's body. The way Mama describes it, the same ties that bind the infant BT to the world bind her as well. She is a dead woman attached to the spirit of a child, both codependent on each other for their existence. To cut the umbilical cord and separate the child would destroy what was left of the baby and drain away the last of Mama's life. Mama's story is perhaps the most obvious parallel to real life. On the surface, the story connects the trauma and pain of a miscarriage. Mama's life was literally tied to the baby. Even after death, the child hung above her, nothing more than a lifeless phantom and reminder of her pain. The baby would never grow up. It would never live, and it would never bring life. When she finally asks Sam to cut the baby's cord, it's symbolic of finally letting go and moving on.
Please, Sam. Do it. Sam. Take me home to Lochna.
Beyond the surface, however, Mama's story is a fascinating one revolving around her choices. In spite of her own hesitancy to have a child, she was willing to do it for Lochna. Over the course of her pregnancy, however, her priorities and feelings shifted. She grew to love the child, on occasion even calling it her own baby. There was purpose in the baby. It wasn't simply a distraction or an inconvenience. It was a precious life, and one that she cherished, even though it wasn't hers and even though she never had the chance to see it face to face. Clifford Unger is perhaps one of the most interesting and impactful stories in all of Death Stranding. Sam is introduced to Cliff as an antagonist. Throughout the game, during Freak Supercell events, Sam is pulled into various battlefields and forced to fight Cliff and his skeletal soldiers. Cliff's mission is singular: get Sam's BB. Seemingly, he will stop at nothing, including killing Sam in order to get the BB back. This is not without good reason, however, and Cliff is no ordinary soldier. The battlefields he fights Sam on are clearly old, from World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. It was during this time period that Clifford Unger served as a captain in the United States Army Special Forces. He was involved in many deadly conflicts across the globe and became notorious for his tact, precision, and unmatched ability to bring his units back from war alive and well. He was a violent man with a skill for the trade, but he eventually fell in love with a woman named Lisa. He married her and the two conceived a child. Cliff left the service in order to be able to properly and safely serve his wife and future child without the threat of violent death looming over his head on every assignment. Tragically, before the birth of his child, Cliff and Lisa were caught in an accident from which only Cliff walked away without major injury. Lisa was rendered brain dead in a permanent coma, unable to see, hear, talk, or move. Out of sheer desperation to save his unborn son, Cliff agreed to allow the newly formed Bridges to remove the baby from Lisa and place him in a pod that simulated his mother's womb. Unbeknownst to Cliff, Bridges' intent with the child was far from preservation of its life, however. They planned to use it in the service of their Bridge baby experiments, utilizing the child's unique properties until it had run its course, then discarding it like the rest. For the months that Cliff was unaware of these intentions, he was constantly at BB's side, tending to him, singing to him, talking to him, and promising him all the things he wished to show and do with his son once he had been delivered to the world. All the while, his wife Lisa lay in silence, a tenuously held life fed by tubes and fluids. This poignant and heavy hope continued for some time until one of Cliff's oldest friends, who served alongside him in the Special Forces unit, tells him of Bridges' motivations. He reveals that they will soon be moving his son to another facility beyond Cliff's reach and care. Clifford Unger's final moments as a man are devastating and characterized by his desperate acts to save his son, and the grisly death that comes as the cost of his failure. Upon being shot while attempting to escape the Bridges facility with BB, he passed on to his beach, but retained his physical body while also gaining the abilities of a BT. With these abilities, he drifts from beach to beach, searching for his lost child, which brings us back to Sam and BB. Upon discovering the BB Sam carries, Cliff makes repeated efforts to get the baby from Sam, pulling him to various battlefield beaches and throwing himself and his unit of skeletal BTs at him. The story of Sam, BB, and Cliff does not end here, but it's where we'll leave it for the moment. Cliff Unger is the figure of a father whose opportunity to raise his son was stolen by opportunists seeking other plans for his flesh and blood. It was his wife and this child that brought purpose and direction to Cliff. They gave him something worthy to sacrifice himself for. The wars and bloodshed of his earlier life were not fulfilling. They divided and brought grief and bereavement upon thousands. Service to his country failed him, but service and protection of his family brought hope and meaning. He left the military service because he would not die for his country if it meant his son losing him, but he gladly laid down his life for that same child if it meant that child had the possibility to continue living.
Stick versus rope. Gun versus string. One more ending before the end.
Nearly any argument made in isolation carries weight. Without resistance or scrutiny, there's no need for defense. Any points I make here may as well be sealed in a titanium box if there are no objections. The singular biggest problem is that, for all the discussion of Death Stranding, the concept that is discussed the least is the pro-life messaging, particularly in regards to infants. What little discourse exists is often sloppy and lacking in true substance. Nevertheless, let's take a few moments using the proverbial stick to mount a proper defense of my stance, starting with the Sacred Symbols podcast. Now, don't be mistaken by the name. Sacred Symbols is not a religious or Christian podcast. The symbols referred to are the symbols found on the 4 main face buttons of a PlayStation controller. However, an episode of this podcast was the first place I found references to pro-life narratives in Death Stranding. The primary and needlessly controversial host, Colin Moriarty, brings these themes to light, and they are sloppily hand-waved away by his co-host, Chris.
I said this early on when I first started playing the game. This game to me is overtly pro-life, which I found really surprising. Not because of who made it. Japan is actually a pretty pro-life nation, and I assume that comes from Japanese people being pro-life. And actually in the United States, we're very pro-life too. Chris and I are both pro-choice, but we have lots of people that listen to the show that are pro-life. But I was really shocked by what I felt like were conservative political messages. But did these kind of political messages shine through to you as well, specifically the pro-life message?
No, I didn't feel like there was anything. I felt like I didn't feel preached to, I guess, which is good. But I also didn't necessarily feel like what I was seeing was pro-life. But that's also because, like, I guess what I envision as somebody who's pro-choice is like when you see BB rolling around in that thing, it's like, yeah, that's a baby. You know what I mean? It's not like this abstract thing that kind of looks like a tadpole. That, like, you know, it's not, it didn't land with me as being directly opposed to what I think. You know what I mean?
Chris says, "No, I didn't feel like there was anything. I didn't feel preached to. When you see BB rolling around in that thing, it's like, yeah, that's a baby. It's not this abstract thing that looks like a tadpole. It didn't land with me as being directly opposed to how I think." Well, how do you think, Chris? Do you think that a baby changes form when it's visible to the human eye? Do you think it's okay to commit murder as long as it's inside another body, so that the more gruesome and horrible aspects aren't visible? Later on, Colin states that BB is a, quote, fully formed third trimester baby, end quote. This isn't true. While BB is third trimester, according to the game, she is 7 months into development, 2 full months from full term. What Chris is struggling with here is rationalizing killing what is clearly a human life. He acknowledges precisely the point that is made by putting the baby in a clear glass tank, while not understanding why it is so significant. Putting Lou inside the clear artificial womb shows what is inside an actual mother's womb. If it's okay to kill a 7-month-old child inside its mother, then there should be no moral objections at all to sucking a baby like Lou out of the pod and throwing it into a dumpster. Putting the zygote or parasite in a clear container does not change its properties in any way. Now, I can already sense 2 lazy arguments that may be leveled out of ignorance. Number 1, sure, Lou may technically be a 7-month-old fetus, but it just looks like a baby, not a fetus. And potentially number 2, nobody wants to abort a 7-month-old fetus. That's a myth made up by pro-lifers to smear the pro-abortion crowd. In response, yes, Lou is actually quite a good representation of what a 7-month-old fetus looks like. And secondly, many people support the idea of abortion up until birth, with some radicals like Ralph Northam, the past governor of Virginia, suggesting it could happen after birth if the mother desires.
There was a very contentious committee hearing yesterday when Fairfax County Delegate Kathy Tran made her case for lifting restrictions on third trimester abortions, as well as other restrictions now in place. And she was pressed by a Republican delegate about whether her bill would permit an abortion even as a woman is essentially dilating, ready to give birth. And she answered that it would permit an abortion at that stage of labor. Do you support her measure and explain her answer?
So in this particular example, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother.
While only 1.1% of reported abortions happen during the third trimester, this does not reflect the support for availability of third trimester abortions. According to Gallup polls from 2023, 40% of women and 27% of men believe abortion should be legal under any circumstances. More specifically, the polls found that overall, 22% of Americans believed abortion should be legal and available in the third trimester. Many pro-abortion advocates, when asked to point out on a chart at which week abortion should stop being legal, have a very difficult time providing a clear answer. This is because they already have a number in their head. Perhaps 20 weeks, maybe 30 weeks. But when confronted with a chart and seeing how unmistakably human a baby is, even at 15 weeks, they can't reconcile their mental views with the physical reality.
To be, just so I'm very consistent. So let's look at the fetal development. Where is it okay for you? What point is it okay to kill?
That's an interesting question, because you're using the word kill and murder. That I don't...
Let's remove murder and kill. Let's assume that the abortion is accidental, so it's not murder. So I just would like to see it pick on the scale. Maybe that'll determine where we disagree.
It's not, I mean, because I'm looking at pictures of developing babies and I can see their characteristics forming on their fingers and their toes, and I understand what is going on. And I had a very difficult pregnancy with my daughter, so I went into the doctor 2 or 3 times a week, so I know exactly what happens at every point. Again, I think it's very dangerous to put these very specific lines and say, okay, for this woman X, this is the point. For this woman Y, this is the point.
This appears to be exactly the conundrum that Chris finds himself in, and perhaps explains what he means when he says, "It didn't land with me as being directly opposed to how I think." If he is one of the 22% of Americans that supports late-term abortion, but his ignorance leads him to assume that a 7-month-old fetus is actually a full-term baby, which is beyond the moral bounds of abortion, he inadvertently reveals that he is against the very position that he believes he holds. In reality, his assessment that it is a living baby at 7 months suggests that his way of thinking is wrong to begin with. It's a lazy argument made in ignorance and destroys itself. Lazy argumentation is common in the few spaces I've found conversations about these themes and their presence in Death Stranding. Moving over to Reddit, it's obviously understood that the user base will skew hard left of center, which would be the ideal place to find opposition. Even so, searching the Death Stranding subreddit, there are very few threads with even a mention of these themes, and the ones that do exist are short, without much user interaction. But let's dig into the most thoughtful thread that I found. It's entitled, "Does Death Stranding contain a pro-life sentiment?" The user lays out some of the surface-level connections that we have already made. The way that Lou is described and classified as equipment, along with the use of common pro-choice phrases to justify the inhumanity of the baby's use. The main objector to these notions is a user that goes by the name of Mr. Crowbar. He's seemingly a superfan of the game, a top 1% commenter and contributor on the subreddit, and has done a lot of work outside of the Reddit for fans of the game. This includes a website full of tips and tricks for players. He's also created a comprehensive game timeline, which is very well done. In response to this question of pro-life messaging, he says, "I think the consensus last time is that the game is more pro-choice, if anything. Sam wanted a kid. He had conceived one in the past, and so chose to take on carrying Lou and becoming a parent. Pro-choice doesn't mean abort everything." The idea that Death Stranding is pro-choice because characters have to make choices is ridiculous on its face. There are good choices and there are bad choices. To acknowledge that certain choices exist does not suggest a support of them. If I suggest a man has the ability to beat his wife because she is annoying him, that does not mean I support it. To use a gaming example, look to BioShock. In the original, Jack, the protagonist, comes across many young girls who are known as Little Sisters. They are genetically altered children whose purpose is to harvest a substance known as Adam from corpses. When these little sisters are discovered, Jack is given a choice. The girls will offer their syringe of Adam, which he can use to upgrade certain abilities via genetic modification. Alternatively, you as a player, and Jack by extension, can choose to kill the little sisters in cold blood so that you can extract the maximum amount of Adam possible. Killing the little sisters is a choice that is actually offered to Jack, and doing so will result in the worst possible ending of the game, a clear indication that murdering children is evil, even if it's available as a choice. In the same way, though Sam as a character could choose to kill or discard Lou at any point, Death Stranding consistently demonstrates why that would be a bad or even an evil choice. In order for us to prove that killing Bibi would be a choice deemed bad, all we have to do is demonstrate that she is considered a human being, which we've already established. Moving on, Mr. Crowbar continues by saying, "Mama's arc is also worth considering. Her child was wanted too, but due to circumstances, the baby was just not viable. Keeping the baby BT was detrimental to it, not letting it pass on. Cutting its cord was the most merciful option for both of them. Plenty of parents end up having to make the choice to abort a fetus they otherwise wanted, for reasons outside their control, and forcing them to carry the fetus just causes misery." The primary problem with this argument is the way that Mr. Crowbar equates Mama's BT, an already deceased child, to Lou, a living and healthy child. They're not the same. Mama severing the cord of her BT, whose human body has already died during childbirth, does not equate to throwing a living child into a furnace because she is, quote, malfunctioning, or simply not wanted. It's also worth pointing out that Mr. Crowbar is using the exact same terminology that Death Stranding makes a point of highlighting. He refuses to say baby, instead opting for the word fetus, because it's easier to humanize murder if you first dehumanize the baby being murdered. For the sake of conciseness, I will not reiterate the entirety of Mama's story since we've already covered it, but it's apparent that if there was a way she could have sacrificed herself to save the child, she would have done so. The reality is, her baby died. There was no other choice. No second option or ability to keep him. In a literal sense, the child's death is an undesired miscarriage that is complicated by the game's interpretation of souls and the afterlife. Mama's story appears to be much less about supporting a choice to abortion and much more an illustration of the pain that comes with losing a child. The original poster of the thread notes the distinction between a living baby and a dead one, and responds to Mr. Crowbar with a reasonable comment. He says, "Mama's baby was born dead though, right? I'm still a bit fuzzy on that plot point. I think that's more of a feature than a bug to Kojima's storytelling. But somehow Mama's baby, who was dead, was the only thing keeping her alive. When the umbilical cord was cut, that's when Mama died. It very well may be Kojima didn't have the pro-choice, pro-life debate in mind when making the game, but I'm not sure how that could be seen as pro-choice. Could you expand on that a bit? Mr. Crowbar does expand by saying, I think the analogy holds given that life and death are blurred in the game, and the baby BT was Mama's own soul or something. But what's clear is that terminating the baby BT was the best choice for it and Mama. I said the game is pro-choice in that the characters choose to be parents. Sam is never demanded to care for Lou, which would be the anti-choice stance. And again with Mama, we see that absence of choice, baby killed by circumstances out of control, is traumatic. The game isn't whacking people over the head with pro-choice stances, but it's definitely not anti-choice. Now, it's true that life and death are sometimes blurred in Death Stranding, but not as much as Mr. Crowbar pretends here. The difference between Baby Lou and Mama's BT are blatantly obvious. The game discourages and penalizes you for killing people, even terrorists. Even if by accident Sam kills someone, he has to incinerate the body or risk a catastrophic void-out. This is not the case with BTs. Mama gives Sam the very cuffs that he uses to sever her BT from her body. Sam can separate any BTs from the world using these cuffs or bullets crafted by using his own blood. There's no consequence to this because these BTs are not alive. It is a clear dividing line between the living and the dead. To suggest otherwise is a willing rejection of the basic principles of the game's world, which Mr. Crowbar absolutely knows and understands, but refuses to acknowledge, because it would lend more credence to a pro-life interpretation of the game. Even so, he attempts to brush past this by reiterating the same point about Mama making a choice to sever her BT, as if that choice is equivalent to killing Lou out of convenience. He fundamentally doesn't seem to understand the distinction between the two situations, as much as he might pretend he does. Even worse, only 3 sentences later, he states that Mama's grief is over the absence of choice. He needs to pick a side. Does Mama have a choice, making the game pro-choice by his standards, or is her grief a result of the lack of choice, making Death Stranding anti-choice? It's very clear that he doesn't have a coherent argument against the idea of pro-life themes. Sadly, it seems much more likely that he simply doesn't like the possibility that they exist and sloppily dismisses them with the most simplistic and incongruent arguments. This sentiment is reflected in other commenters, with one who responds to Mr. Crowbar's initial argument stating, I know this post is old, but thank you for this. It's been a while since I played this game. At first the issue didn't come to my mind much, but after that Supreme Court nonsense I was thinking about replaying, and I could not shake the idea that this game might be pro-life. It's uncomfortable for Reddit to address these themes because they simply do not like them. The suggestion that there might be anti-abortion messaging in the game is enough that it gave this individual pause at the idea of playing it. All it took was somebody equating choices existing as being pro-choice to set his mind at ease. He was ready to accept any other explanation than the one directly in front of him. The sad reality is, as I dug deeper into the threads, it became clear that this argument about choices was the most common and the strongest one I could find. The second most common simply being various forms of, no, you're overthinking it, and that isn't possible, along with a variety of attacks on pro-life people suggesting that because pro-life people are evil, the game couldn't be justifying their position. That said, there are a few people I found that offered some unique perspectives. One says, I feel that thinking this game had a message about abortion is quite superficial. The game explores the wide themes of life, death, and the afterlife. The point of the BBs, I felt, was more about how unborns are walking the thin line between life and death, how they exist in this special and mysterious state where they are alive but not yet in the world of the living. It then made sense story-wise that they were closely linked to those who were dead but not yet out of this world. Speaking of unborn children in vague terms like them existing in a special and mysterious state is simply a way to obfuscate the reality. It's a tactic similar to the use of zygote or clump of cells. If BBs are simply existing in a special and mysterious state, partially alive but also dead, who's to really say what is moral and what isn't in regards to how they're treated? More significantly, though, there is a fundamental misunderstanding of Death Stranding's lore and the bridge babies themselves. The game does not suggest the BBs themselves are halfway between the world of the living and the world of the dead. A BB is connected to the womb of its still mother, and it is that still mother that gives the BB the ability to sense BTs. not as properties as an unborn child. Children are required for this process because the inherent connection via umbilical cords allow the baby to adopt the abilities of its still mother. Without the still mother, BBs are simply a child in a pod with no special abilities. Baby Lou is acknowledged to be every bit as alive as Sam, Deadman, or anyone else in Death Stranding. Continuing, this user moves on to make a very telling and disturbing argument. He says, if anything, the game is pro-abortion because fetuses being actually removed from their mother's womb to be used as tools is presented as something useful and positive. But again, I don't think anything in the story could lead to a position for or against it. Once again, the argument is bookended with the suggestion that there just isn't enough information to really know one way or the other. I would contend that this examination is more than enough to suggest it, but let's address his claims that the game is pro-abortion because using unborn children as equipment is intended to be useful. The lack of self-awareness is astonishing, and the inability to understand or acknowledge how vile this line of thinking is reveals a lot. Abusing people for personal gain or the pursuit of the greater good is evil. In the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, syphilis treatment was withheld from black patients so that the disease could be studied in order to help future sufferers. The Chinese one-child policy caused millions of women to undergo unwanted sterilizations and resulted in millions of forced abortions and fines. The stated goal of the one-child policy was to reduce overpopulation, which would lead to economic growth and lifting of millions out of poverty. Near the end of World War II, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, cities full of innocent civilians, killing approximately 200,000 people. The apparent goal was to put an end to the war and stop prolonged suffering. The goal of the Khmer Rouge was to bring about a communist agrarian utopia by trimming what was viewed as the fat of society. The result was nearly 2 million deaths in what are now known as the killing fields. This is what Death Stranding is asking the player to grapple with. Human beings who are used sacrificially in the hopes that it will benefit society as a whole. This isn't speculation. Fragile's mother explicitly states this, and let's not forget the BB graveyard, which symbolizes the children Bridges killed for the greater good. Time and time again, Death Stranding signals the importance of preserving human life. Time and time again, it signals that BBs are as human as anyone else. They have bodies, beaches, souls, and emotions. They are more than simply a mysterious zygote floating in a bizarre metaphysical space. They are fully alive, and the preservation and value of life is extended to them. Sam doesn't choose to keep Lou simply because he wants a child. He also does so because he knows to kill her would be deeply wrong. Morally, he is denied that choice. In spite of the propaganda of Bridges and the justification of many around him, the truth is directly before his eyes. The baby in the pod is much, much more than a tool. Death Stranding is densely packed with the themes of connection, the value of life, and the importance of protecting it at all costs, especially the lives of those that are weak or helpless. In establishing that Lou and other Bridge babies are both alive and human, this protection is extended to them as well. Further, the game examines the cost often required to protect life. Fragile's body is aged beyond recognition because of her selfless choice to save the citizens of South Knot City. Mama grieves the loss of the surrogate child she carried, becoming a shut-in just to protect the shapeless spirit of the dead unborn baby and succumbing to death when she finally lets go in acceptance. Cliff Unger ultimately loses his life in service of the protection of his unborn son, his most painful regret being his inability to be with that son and raise him as a father. But what about this child that Cliff sacrifices himself to protect? He is none other than Sam Porter Bridges himself. In a particularly poignant scene, Cliff finally realizes who Sam is and says to him, "You're Sam Bridges, my son, my bridge to the future. Without you, I was just like any other Cliff, a dead end, no way forward." Sam brought purpose to Cliff's life, a reason to continue on, and Cliff saw more in Sam than simply a child to love. He saw a metaphorical bridge, a singular child connecting one generation to the next, a bridge between people, an extension of the human race. He saw life with beautiful promise and potential, inside and outside the womb. Every child has the potential to be a bridge in countless ways. Without generations, there is no bridge to the future. In the final moments of Death Stranding, we get to see Sam's bridge to the future.
Ew.
Bridge babies are quite literally bridges between this world and the other side.
I told you before, Sam. The past just won't let go.
But BB-28 here has been leaning further and further towards the world of the living. Towards you, Sam.
It's because we're partners.
Bridges wants to build a new America on the bodies of murdered children.
Sam, a baby's a tool, not a human being. Bridge, yes. Baby, no.
This isn't what we agreed on. You said you'd do everything in your power to save BB.
We are. But we cannot release your son just yet. Believe me when I tell you it's for the best.
This is a woman in a mask who's done nothing but lie to me.
I thought I could save the BBs, I really did. But there's no stealing back a stolen life, is there?
This weapon is transforming into a living being.
Everything's true. Except for all the lies.
I have a duty to protect our country. Lies are an unfortunate necessity.
They were born into this world. They were a part of it, same as you and me. They deserved a second chance.
I mean, you know she's gone. You want to live your life in the shadow of the dead?
Come on. You, of all people, you chose the dead over the living. Why else would you be here?
You'll be out of there in no time. And the second all this is over, I'm going to take you wherever you want to go.
BB-28 is becoming self-aware, becoming an actual child.
Doesn't sound like a problem to me.
They're moving your son to a new facility tomorrow. You'll never see him again. He'll serve as the foundation of a new communications network. A sacrifice for a nation that no longer exists.
All in service to a new America. So many crimes. And we were complicit.
You told me your name was Sam Porter. But you're Sam Bridges. My son. My bridge to the future.